like NATO, organizations like NATO, and second-party countries. Um, You could think of us as the triage or the switchboard in the DoD. We have deep connections with the services, the agencies, departments, the leadership. To date, our strategy remains the only one that is solidified and published. That's why a lot of people are looking at our work and trying to adopt our work. What they're doing is essentially looking at the large themes, and they're working around the themes that make sense for them. This is good for the government. This is good for the United States because it's going to guarantee that there's interoperability and a singular sort of focus from the vendor perspective to provide the products and services in Zero Trust that are going to make sense for everybody. So the foundational documents in the months that we've been together has been numerous. They didn't exist before we started. We're talking about the release of the DoD Reference Architecture version 2.0, the strategy, the implementation plan, and soon this summer we hope to release publicly the Zero Trust overlay for the NIST 800-53. That to us would complete the whole set of documentation that we require to help everybody get to Zero Trust as quickly as possible. Our goal, like I said before, was to achieve target level Zero Trust in 27. Target level for us means being able to stop the adversary. There's a lot of science that goes behind how we defined our activity level and our capability level. A lot of it has to do with threat. A lot of it has to do with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. A lot of it has to do with a lot of other information not found on unclassified networks that made us develop the definition the way we did. So we feel confident. Still has to be tested, but we feel very confident that if target is met, it would represent a very swift resistance to any form of attack, certainly lateral movement and other means to enumerate the network. And that's exactly where we want to be right now in the DoD going forward. So a lot of what I just spoke about is the IT fix, but there's a lot more going on to make sure that Zero Trust is successful in the DoD. In the Department of Defense, we call it the .mlpf. So what I'm talking about there, and it's translatable to industry and elsewhere, is what are the policies? What is the doctrine? What is the logistics? What is the training that might have to happen to support Zero Trust and support its success in the Department of Defense? So not only are we working on the IT pieces of Zero Trust, but we're also working on these other supporting entities within our portfolio office. We're working it centrally. We're working it with the Defense Acquisition University. We're engaging with agencies in their training programs, as an example. And so some may be aware, some may not be aware that we are on target for delivering 3 Zero Trust courses within the Department of Defense. One is already available on JKO online. That's the Basic ZT Awareness course. It was released 2 or 3 months ago. It's on Joint Knowledge Online. And it covers the basic tenets of Zero Trust, the principles of Zero Trust. It's a 2-hour course, and that is for military and civilians, and we are seriously considering making that a mandate, either a mandate for it or combining it with the cybersecurity coursework and updating that to include Zero Trust within that. The other 2 that are coming by July will be training for senior leaders. That's going to be a 4-hour course. And then the last one is going to be a 3, 4, or 5-day course, and that's going to be hands-on training for practitioners and implementers. You have to remember that people that are going to be installing Zero Trust need to understand what they're working with, need to write policies and rules and all of that, and to do it correctly. That requires training. So we're hoping to train so that they can then train the trainers, and this would be a continuous process throughout the next 5 years. So looking to the future, Zero Trust, no doubt, is a paradigm shift in cybersecurity. It's the new way. It is the only way that we can protect our data, personnel, missions from adversaries going forward. The tactics, techniques, and procedures are changing, and they're getting ever more sophisticated, and Zero Trust is the exact model we believe that could actually stop those sorts of things. It's not lost on us. It's not certainly lost on me that this is not an easy journey. It's going to be difficult. I think everybody recognizes that it's going to be difficult. We'll work component by component to make it happen. I said it before and I'll say it now, at least in the DoD, funding is not necessarily the problem here. It's making sure that we remain on schedule and that we have the products and services from vendors that can be integrated together to actually create the Zero Trust solution that we're seeking. In terms of, just to close, for challenges and opportunities for partnership, we recommend that vendors map their products and services against the mapping, the definition of Zero Trust according to the pillar, the 7-pillar model of our activities. That you could assume when you're talking to the Department of Defense for cybersecurity professionals, that's the new cybersecurity language. That's the dialect that you need to speak to when you're talking to Department of Defense from this point forward. We really want to see multi-vendor integrations. Not one vendor is going to solve this problem. So we need to have integrated solutions across 2 or more vendors that cover the mapping of the activities. That's what we want to see in the DoD. When you are asking for meetings with decision makers, they want to talk about what you're adding, what value you're adding to the overall solution. We want to see interoperability. I already said that. We also want to see API security. We think APIs are apps just like anything else. Sometimes it's forgotten, but we have not forgotten it. We need to have API security, so I just ask you to think about that in terms of your products and what you're doing about that. And lastly, I can go on with the list, but the applications, the software, they need to be written to be aware of their ZT surroundings going forward. So even if something is cloud native, that doesn't necessarily mean it's ZT native. It needs to be aware of ICAM systems. It needs to be able to take the ins and outs of rules and policies. This is what I'm talking about being ZT aware. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity. I hope I stuck to 10 or so minutes. I'll take questions after Jim speaks. Again, I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy. That was a fantastic update on Zero Trust and what you're helping DoD do. And it certainly is a very critical topic for us all in this day and age where we live. I work for NetApp as one of our CTOs, and we focus on data management and data security. So I'm going to have a context around data security. When Zero Trust started out in 2009, it goes back to a guy named John Kindervag, who was with Forrester Research, who was kind of the father of Zero Trust, or one of them, if you will. And when it started, it was very strong network security, right? It was the old castle and moat situation, defense in depth, where you had to get through the gate, through the moat, or into the intranet. And then once you did, you were godlike and got access to everything. And I think you touched on that, Randy. That day and age is of the dinosaurs. It's just not good enough anymore, right? So if you go look at some of the breaches we've had, if you go read the Verizon data breach investigation reports from 2022, 18% of breaches were from insiders, right? So if you look at the likes of Edward Snowden, Chelsea, and those folks that got in and had access to that data, if they'd followed Zero Trust, they didn't have a need to know all of that. And they may not have had access to that data. That's the world we live in, and that's what we've got to drive towards in trying to thwart and reduce this information, right? The spillage of it. So around the data side now, in the last 2 or 3 years, Zero Trust has started to really focus on the data itself and not just the network. And the answer is you need both. And you need those controls to be dynamic. So you want policies that can be spun up on demand. You want enforcement of those policies at multiple locations. You want administrators of those policies to be able to dynamically set access and controls to data. You want to work with all the best industry partners out there. There's several, and they're at the show. I've talked to a few, Illumio, AppGate, Radiant. All of these guys have wonderful software that ties on these client edges to authenticate a user, to figure out who they are and what segment do they need to the data, right? You don't want a user coming in and getting everything. So you deploy these best practices and you figure out that segment of one for that user to get what he needs to get, right? And you always want to use other best practices, things out there, and you want to layer them together, right? So there's biometrics, there's retina scans, thumbprints, CAC cards, PIV cards, you name it. All of those need to still be there as well, RSA tokens. And you want to apply all of that together on the front end side as you go through the network, and you want to have the network authenticated. And when you get through the network, you want the data part to be very robust, right? So you want to leverage all of these best practices out there around the data itself. And that leads to kind of the area where I tend to focus is this MCAP core and perimeter, if you will. The data itself is at the core of everything we do. And if I might say this, don't take offense, we can have all the apps and networks and servers in the world we want, but if we don't have any data, we don't have anything, right? And you don't need to secure much of anything. So the data is really the new oil of this economy or this world we live in for federal agencies. That's what we have to protect. So you want to use the best practices around managing that data. And one of the first things you want to do is to identify what data you have and classify it and categorize it. So by doing that, you now know what is sensitive, what's not. What do I need to encrypt? What do I need to protect? Maybe something is a liability to your organization and is considered toxic, and you just want to delete it and get rid of it, right? There's a lot of retainment laws now, 7 years, 21 years. For the Veterans Administrations, who's one of our customers, it's permanent, it's indefinite, right? We've got to maintain the records for the veterans, things like that. They're a large customer of NetApp as well. But once you classify that data and figure out what you have, now you can start to set the permissions on that data. And as Randy and this folks in this audience probably know, you always want to assume breach, right? And always verify, never trust. And that starts with setting those least permissions to get to data. How many people in here worked in an environment in IT where when you created a share in Windows, you said full control access everyone? It's okay. Nobody's going to jail. But I know I did. And Randy, thank you for being honest. And we did that haphazardly and just moved forward. We trusted people. That's no more. You can't do that, right? You have to start out and say this one person or this group of people gets access to this item or that item, right? So you want to deploy those permissions with least control, but yet let them be there to help and get to what you need to. Then you get into the protection of the data. So how do you protect it? You want to deploy encryption of data at rest and during transit. So these are things that NetApp does as well. You want to use either AES 256 or better encryption as a general rule. You want to use something like TLS encryption 1.3 to ship data and move it around so that end to end you encrypt that data. And something else we encourage our customers to do is use client-side encryption. So we do support things like NFS Kerberos, IPsec, which can encrypt that entire session from that client to the data point, right? And that works in NetApp as well. And I think I heard the word cloud in there as well. So all of these best practices that Randy and I are talking about, you want them to be from edge to core to cloud and multi-cloud. You don't want a hole showing up anywhere just because you went from one cloud to another or one location to another, right? And then on the protection side, you want to be able to back up and recover and protect that data instantly as much as possible. So with NetApp, we have pointer-based snapshots which can take complete copies of hundreds of terabytes of data in 1 or 2 seconds. And if we need to, we can recover the file or the entire set of data back to a prior snapshot of that data in 2 seconds. We don't want to do this in hours or days or weeks. We don't have time for that. So NetApp brings a lot of value there around protecting that data. And we do this in cloud, multi-cloud, and on-prem. Okay? The other point I would say is around monitoring the environment. You want to consistently monitor what's going on. One of the tools that we use to classify and identify data as well as monitor going forward is something called Data Sense. And it builds a baseline of all of the data in the environment. It runs in cloud or on premise. And it builds a hash baseline of the data sets themselves. And it will alert you if any file or data is changing. So you can get proactive alerts saying that Randy logged in on 2 a.m. Saturday night, which we know he didn't, by the way, and he's accessing data or doing something when he shouldn't. And that leads into user behavior analytics, another best practice. You want to learn the patterns of data access for people. And if they're doing things Monday through Friday, that's good. But the minute they come in Saturday night at 2 a.m. and start to do something and churn a bunch of data or download it, that's probably something going on there. So one of the things that NetApp has done with our anti-ransomware protection is to be able to monitor that UBA activity and track that anomaly. And we'll take a snapshot in 2 seconds and maybe delay that user for 2 seconds. But now we have a recovery point where we can go recover that data at any time if they did something wrong. So you want to continually do that to monitor and see what's happening in the environment. You want to alert, you want to log, right? So we can track user access to data and files, you want to track administrative access to files, and you want to make sure those logs are accurate. And then you want to continually update all of this information. You want it to be dynamic, right? You don't want to set it and forget it, right? That can have a good context, but in terms of zero trust, no. You want to continually re-verify, re-authenticate, right? Make sure that person is getting what they need to, and then alert when things are not in place. And one other point I'll bring up around data and protection is immutability of data. So the attackers are getting into customers' environments and encrypting and destroying the backups first, or deleting the backups, and then they encrypt the primary data for the customer. And the customer has no recovery point except to pay the attacker and get the data back. So at NetApp, we promote immutable backup targets. We have a product called SnapLock. It's based on a compliance clock. So you can write something, but you can never change it until the clock expires. So now we have customers backing up to a known good immutable backup target, and no one can delete or corrupt it. Not an outsider, not an insider attack, not a disgruntled employee, anyone. And that's the only way you know you can recover something, that it can't be modified or changed later. And then you can roll these compliance clocks around and have continuous backup and recovery along those lines. But at the end of the day, the data is really where we build that MCAP, that micro core and perimeter, right? And we want to first off identify what you have, classify it, figure out how to protect it, put the least permissions on it. We want to encrypt it at rest during transit, right? We want to lock it down, make it secure no matter where it goes. And we want to make sure you can instantly back up and recover that data in any location, and to continually monitor and alert on the environment so we know what's happening. So hopefully that made sense on the data side. And I know Randy and his architecture has got 7 pillars, and one of them is data, and that naturally fit right in to what NetApp does. So Randy, thanks for the intro, and thanks for the time. I guess it's back to the audience here for questions or comments, Randy.
If you have a question and have not submitted it via Ask Me TN Cyber, please come and use this handheld microphone so everyone on streaming can hear it.
My name is Jim Payne, and I'm from SecureG. And it's often said now that PKI, Zero Trust Architecture, is as much a cultural pivot as it is a technology pivot, Zero Trust. I want your comments on that, Randy. And how do we get the culture ready for this, if we're using the terms pivot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the culture gets to the .mlpf that I was talking about. There are, in the government you have 30-year careers. You have
Or
30
more,
year,
or more.
You have 30 years of
Dr. Fauci.
you have 30 years of understood cybersecurity doing it one way, and all of a sudden you have a transformation sort of idea. It's very difficult to pivot.
Perimeter architecture.
Exactly. The fact is, you're not going to be able to have them move so fast. It's going to be a generational thing. I think you have a fraction of people that move, regardless of
Yes.
whatever it is, 10 to 20%. The rest are going to probably remain legacy, and they're going to have to maintain, because things don't change on a dime. Our process for zero trust is going to take 5+ years, and forevermore after that. But we still have infrastructure on the ground that still requires knowledge of the present way, but it needs to be modernized. And then it's the new generation. One of the biggest challenges of the portfolio office is getting whole agencies to think about zero trust. People understand what it is and how to do it, but it's that middle layer, and I'm presuming that this is the same thing in industry, which is difficult to influence. So instead of becoming super duper frustrated, you just work with the folks that are moving it around. That's simply how I see the problem. And eventually it will generate itself out. But you're absolutely right. It exists. It's hard, but it's not going to be fully changeable immediately.
Is there anything government can do to shorten that cycle of 30-year veterans waiting till they retire?
Well,
is there any change management investment?
I can't speak to it, but I know there's a workforce strategy. I believe that strategy is kind of like you want people to come in and out. I think that would help a lot.
Yes.
I think continuous learning, mandatory, helps a lot. Those are sorts of things. I haven't really thought too much about it, but to me, when I look back on my career, the continuous learning was the key thing that allowed me to move with technology without skipping a beat.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, where you need to be in this career field.
Super. Well, thank you so much. I'll turn the mic out to others.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the sort of software architecture for zero trust. So if you take ICAM, which is sort of in some way a piece of the whole solution, and as ICAM has been under development by DISA, not necessarily DoD CIO, for a couple of years, and it's getting pretty close, right? I mean, we're part of that effort, but we're sort of wondering, with the 27 date, I'm sure you're challenged as well to try to get not just ICAM rolled out by 27, but to have zero trust, and which set of systems will be able to be at what level of compliance, and what is the product set? I know it's complicated, right? What product set would be, because ICAM I think is based on 3 different software products that required probably more integration than what somebody first anticipated. And I'm thinking zero trust, great, but what is that suite going to look like? And any comments would just be very appreciated.
Just high-level comments.
Sure.
The solution architecture that right now exists in ICAM could change over time, because they're always looking at best-of-breed capability. So what exists today might not exist 5 years from now. That being said, the ICAM system run by DISA is a system that is vital for zero trust. Zero trust has a foundation of identity. ICAM presents that identity within the DoD system. So we need ICAM to be rock solid, and we need it to be available on NIPR and SIPR. We, in POM 23, fiscal 23, over the next 5 years from there, the Department of Defense gave NSA and DISA dollars to modernize ICAM. Part of that modernization on the NSA side is to allow for ABAC, which is foundational to do advanced level zero trust. So we can get to target level zero trust without any further investments other than minor modernization. But we can't get to advanced unless we have ABAC. So NSA was tasked to develop ABAC. They have the expertise from experiences that they have on different other networks that they're going to bring over into the DoD networks. So that's being engineered and designed in, collaborating with DISA, and then fully fleshing out the ICAM architecture in SIPR so that we have 100% ICAM on NIPR and SIPR. For a lot of people not working ICAM, what I just said probably, went over this way, but that's okay. For the folks that do understand it, it was specifically designed to coincide with the fiscal 27 delivery of target. And for those special missions that need to go to advanced by 27, that's a self-chosen thing mostly. The ICAM system will be there to support them for that as well. And that's why we're developing actually both of them in parallel.
Hello, sir. So one of the big weaknesses of the old system that I always thought was out there was that the data was always dependent on a network or a network function for its protection. So going forward into the zero trust world, do you foresee that zero trust is going to allow us to get to the point where the data can be secure without relying on the network to be its protector and the data just being the damsel in distress? Thank you.
So we need connectivity. So whether or not you have a physical layer 2 network, or TCP/IP, or you have RF, which really is connection, it's a network, you're always going to need a network to move the data. I think by depending, your main question is, are we going to be depending on network cybersecurity to protect the data? And I would say that's going to be less and less and less and less. So it's more about protecting the data. Encryption in flight, encryption at rest, data tagging and labeling, all the good things that Zero Trust brings on protection of that data. So therefore, wherever the data gets stored, it's secured. The security moves with the data, so to speak. I think NetApp could speak a lot about that as well, and that's exactly what we're doing in the DoD. We will always need a DISA because we always need to move data around. But the function of cybersecurity is going to move more towards the data and less reliance on just the network. But they both have to coexist. We still need redundancy, resiliency, and survivability, and that's network-based.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I'll just add in, so the data itself is becoming more intelligent, right? I think the comment was referred towards a long time ago where the data sat and it was never really active or acted upon until something happened to it. But one of the things that we're doing in the storage itself is that user behavior analytics. So we're watching people accessing file data, for example, and know the normal behavior patterns. And then we can proactively on our own go take a backup snapshot instantly the minute someone does something that's an anomaly or they shouldn't be doing, whether they're injecting a WannaCry virus or whatever it might be. The other thing that we do on the back end is we have file policy integration with about 10 or 12 SIEM servers out there. So think of Symantec, think of a Varonis, Fortinet, and there's about 12 of them where we can proactively send a file out to another app or VM to proactively scan it, to look for viruses. We can cleanse it, we can grant or deny access to it. All of these things are dynamic in the data and the storage itself, and we do this in cloud as well as on-prem. So there's a lot more things happening on the data side that, to Randy's point, we need both. You need all of them.
Yep.
And it can only be stronger if you put all of those together.
That was our final question.
Okay.
Please welcome back Paul Fredenberg.
All right, well, thank you, Rennie, Jim. That was great. I know we could have spent a lot of time here. I appreciate your insights. There's lots of work to do here. This is not going to be easy, but it's going to be a government-industry partnership that's going to get us through this, and so that came out very clear. It's all about protecting the data. We have to do this better. It can't just be about the perimeter. This is critical when you think about the threats to our environment, threats to our critical infrastructure, threats to our way of life, threats to doing business. I mean, this is very important. and then it's all about the data. And the last thing I'll take away, there are going to be cultural challenges to implementing this, and they have to be addressed. I think we need to address them head on, because I think we have to push through that at the greatest possible speed in order to get to where we need to go. And so I greatly appreciate these insights. In lieu of a speaker gift, AFCEA is going to provide a donation to the Fisher House on behalf of both of you. So thank you very much. This concludes our micro keynote session. We're going to move into a break. After that break, we have a full set of theater sessions and breakouts on the floor here. And the last session for the main program will be a panel featuring the principal cyber advisors of each of the military services, and that'll be right here at 4 p.m., and we'll see you all back here. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.